This episode of the BeanCast is brought to you by Content Marketing World, the world's premier content marketing event. Find out more at contentmarketingworld.com today. Use the offer code BeanCast. Bandwidth provided by Recursive Squirrel Interactive. Visit them on the web at recursivesquirrel.com. Episode 557. 3 guests, 1 voice. Monday, August 26, 2019. It's time for this week's edition of the BeanCast, a weekly discussion about the news and issues facing marketers today. I'm your host, Bob Norp. Thanks for joining us. No matter where we work in the marketing world, striving for great creative is a universal desire. And while there is no set formula for achieving that objective, there are things we can all do to reach that common goal more often. What are they? Tonight we'll discuss. Also, whether your brand is promoting the competition, why brand mascots work, protecting child influencers, plus the good, the bad, and the ugly. That's the lineup. Let's meet tonight's panel. Thanks for joining us for this week's BeanCast. I'm Bob Norp, and with me on the panel for this evening, we start with the founder and president of Convince and Convert, author, speaker, Mr. Jay Baer. Hi, Jay.
Bob, fantastic to be back with you. Thank you for the opportunity.
You're welcome. Now, next up, she's one of the first voice marketing experts on the scene, the founder and principal consultant of Beetle Moment Marketing, Ms. Emily Binder. Hi, Emily.
Hi, Bob. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here with you, Jay, and Mitch.
And speaking of which, finally, we have the founder of 6 Pixels Group, author, speaker, Mr. Mitch Joel. Hi, Mitch.
Bobby, how are you?
The only person in the world who calls me Bobby anymore, but I love it anyway. Well, we got a lot to cover, and I want to jump right in with this first topic. There were 3 articles this past week about creative that I found interesting. The first dealing with how to generate ideas, the second with the diminishing role of the copywriter in the idea process, and the third on how clients can be better stewards of the idea. So, Mitch, let's take these one at a time. Let's talk first about generating ideas. I found this article to be fascinating because it was talking about how we put so much pressure on ourselves to come up with that perfect idea that's going to get everybody excited about the product and about the brand and do what we're asking them to do. But that process is so convoluted at most places because most people put all that pressure on themselves to come up with the idea right away instead of realizing that lightning just strikes when it strikes and you need to generate lots and lots and lots and lots of ideas to find it. Has that been your experience in the creative process, or is this just one person's opinion that doesn't really reflect your own experiences in the industry?
I think it's really hard, and we have tremendous expectations on what it means to do creative in this day and age. And I think part of it also just has to do with the fact that the platforms are so different and so varied. And so we tend to sort of look at this stuff and go, look, what's going to make it work? How are things going to run in the marketplace? And there is just a tremendous amount of pressure. And this idea that everything has to be inspired or creative and we have to push to make memorable ads, I just don't know if that was ever really something that happened. Like, we tend to look at the best of the best and go, Super Bowl ads, Apple. And if you take a step back from that and think about, well, we always lived in a world where there was just a ton of ads, and most of the ads never resonated and never made any sense. But through repetition and just the fact that they were being outbought by others brought them to the top. Now we're in a place where there's so much, there's an abundance of it. And I think we just sort of stammer around that, looking to see, like, why is everything average? Well, everything was always average. And I think we tend to romanticize the past.
But I like
Where
what he says though, because it's just like it's not just about the fact that most of the ads have always been a little bit kind of wonky. Nothing's really resonated except for that once in a blue moon great creative ad. But I think it's interesting his process that he poses that I've never heard said so eloquently in any context. That the idea generation process is not about coming up with one good idea. It's about coming up with lots and lots of bad ideas until suddenly the good idea comes up. That's why the best agencies take so much time to generate so many ideas so that collaboratively they can find that one idea that's going to resonate.
But if you speak to musicians, and listen, I was in the music business industry for years before I was in the ad business, and you speak to the greatest of the greatest, it's absolutely not necessarily true. A lot of them will tell you that their greatest songs came to them in 15 minutes, and some of the songs that were the greatest took them sometimes 2 weeks or years to come back to. I don't think there's this formula to it. I also think it's clouded in the commercialism of the work that's being done. We tend to want to shift this to being the sort of art creative form and not really think about the sort of material aspects of what we're trying to do. I mean, in the article, he talks about great clients are on a mission to create iconic work that produces lasting, meaningful brands. And I sort of scoffed at it because, yes, it is a lovely sentiment, and I think we should all bring that to the work that we do. But ultimately, those clients don't usually last more than 7 months. That's never the mandate of what they're trying to do or even the ask of the agency. I was in the agency business for 20 years. I can't remember one client who sat us down and said, look, at the end of the day, I want to make sure that this work is iconic. It was, how do we get through this quarter really fast, really succinctly, really quickly, and within budget?
Well, that jumps to the last article, which I think is probably the most fascinating out of all the articles, which is that idea that clients can be better stewards of the idea. And I love how all three of these articles really talk about the idea as being paramount, that it's not just a great creative execution, it's that core idea and how it needs to be shepherded at every stage. It's not just shepherded by the creative team putting it out, it's also shepherded by the client and by the support staff and by everybody just firing on all cylinders looking for that idea and managing it through that process to fruition. And the best clients always do that. And I'm wondering, Emily, in your own experience, with the client side of the marketing equation, I don't even know how to ask this question. I mean, it's like, did you see it happening that way? Is there anything about that rings true in terms of the fact that the client needs to be part of a larger team and that everybody has to be embracing the idea at every stage in order to bring it to existence, that it can't be just done unilaterally by one person of vision?
Yes, absolutely. That resonates. I think what stood out to me about being a good shepherd and protecting the fragility of an idea, I think meetings and how many cooks are in the kitchen is always important. So you want to have buy-in, right? That's important. But it gets to be complicated and messy when you have people weighing in who really have no business weighing in, or when you have a room full of executives saying, well, I don't like that copy. Well, you're not the customer. So I think it's important definitely to have that person, like the owner of the idea on the client side. Sure.
Yeah,
And
and I also wonder like how as you were saying that, Bob, I was like, I wonder what J.J. Abrams would say back to you. Like in terms of like really thinking about how an idea works. I think input is important. I think there being shepherds of an idea are important. But I think ultimately in the work that I've seen, it usually falls within a very small, select, and by the way, expertise group. I mean, there are just people who know how to do this and they do it really, really well. In fact, a lot of the best ideas that we see in market, in particular in the advertising side, is stuff that the client resisted. It's not the version that they loved. It's not the version that everybody worked on, even on the client side. And on the contrary, on the other side, we typically hear from creatives like, yeah, it was like that or didn't reach its full potential because of client intervention. And I think there's a true story there that often when agencies are brought in or creative departments are brought in, they can and should have the flexibility to see things differently than the client who just lives and breathes the brand. It's the curse of knowledge. And I think we need to be very sort of skeptical of a lot of the articles because the creative process is finicky. And I think sort of creating these sort of formulaic ways isn't how the greatest work has ever come out.
There's something though about this. I never took any of these articles as being formulaic. In fact, in the pre-show, the lead up to the show that I always record that gives you the executive summary, I even talked very briefly about how it's not formulaic, that you can't just can or some kind of simple process that you can use and replicate over and over again. But there is truth to some of the criticism processes that he talked about this green, yellow, red process of going through and offering the green light opportunities. I really like these aspects of the creative, and these are the areas I think we need to explore more. And these are the areas specifically that have problems. And being at least that process oriented in shepherding the idea, to give some kind of salient feedback that's useful to the creative team, as opposed to being just unilaterally, this is not good, I don't like this, or this is great, and just going by your gut.
Yeah.
Well, that advice works in relationships or in any negotiation. I mean, start with a positive and you save the ask for the end. And
I always say
how many
every
compliments
relation.
to give your spouse for every negative thing you say.
I always say every relationship counselor I ever saw in my entire life has helped me in business more than it's helped me in my personal relationships. But
I feels to me like the real ingredient here is just simply empathy, right? When you have clients that are empathetic, both for the work that the agency is doing, the work that their own team is putting in, empathy for the fact that ideas are fragile and the first idea presented isn't always the best idea, that sometimes things need to be adjusted, but not unilaterally thumbs up or thumbs down. It's a soft skill, right? And some people are better at it than others. And as you say, Bob, some people are better at relationships than others. And in my experience, having been doing this now for almost 30 years, the clients that exhibit true empathy are the best clients, period.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I would add on that also I think it's empathy plus experience and respect. And I think that the respect goes obviously both ways, where you have to feel that the client has a real sort of grasp of the brand that perhaps the agency or creative team doesn't see. And I think the green, yellow, red is good when it's done well. What I've seen traditionally is that it becomes Frankenstein. Oh, just sort of put an arm there and a neck there and a head there, and look, it's a human being. No, it's a Frankenstein. Like, add. I like that part here. I like that color. Make the logo, and then it winds up losing the whole thing. So there's a real fine line there between criticism, feedback, editing, and having somebody who has the skill to sort of, years and years ago, there was a very famous article on the feed and caring of creative types. And that sort of soft skill, like Jay said, it's really rare to come across both a client and even agency lead who really can do the not left or right, good or bad.
And I do want to, before we move off this topic, touch briefly on the third article, because the diminishing role of the copywriter in the idea process, that one kind of struck me, being that I started off in this business as a copywriter. And this article basically said that, this article was from Digiday. It's that confession series that I love so much, where they trade an anonymity for truth. But this person was complaining that they were a copywriter, that they were spread across several art directors, and they were servicing these art directors' visions rather than being part of the process. And maybe you can talk a little bit more about that, Mitch, in terms of your experience in the agency world. What was your experience in that sense? Were you finding that the copywriter was not participating as much? Or have you seen that in the industry elsewhere in other agencies?
The truth of the matter is, and this isn't a slight against Digiday or the confessions, but confessions are usually coming from people who are somewhat disgruntled, and it typically has that. So it has elements that are really interesting. But I do, as a past agency owner who had 3,000 employees at the end, and we were managing this sort of massive thing, was able to sort of look at it and realize a couple things. That when you have the team of creative and edit and copy together, it was never about creative taking the lead and copy following. It was about who in that dynamic was the stronger one. And I can tell you countless times where we had it set up, at least that the copywriter was lead on the idea and that the creative direction fell from the copy and vice versa. So again, I don't think it's a general sort of thing where we can say this. I will say that being a writer myself, the value of words and the written word has always been somewhat backseat to the visual of it, the audio of it, the video of it. So to sort of complain that, the words matter, like it's the sort of beating of the drum of every traditional journalist as well. And I get it because that was my background and that was my pedigree as well. So I do kind of look at it and go, it depends. It depends on who it is. It depends on their level of work. Some of the best creative work we've ever seen has been copy driven, period, end of sentence.
And I fully agree with you on that side of the equation. I mean, yeah, I think that she or he was completely disgruntled in that particular situation. But I did get a sense of the core of the argument that somehow that being spread across several people who each had core responsibility for the vision for a single brand, and here you are as a copywriter floating in and out of these idea sessions with these different art directors as opposed to being solely focused on a client and a vision. I can see how that can be disconcerting and it can lead to worse ideas.
But it's agency structure, Bob. I mean, that's like, you have an art director who is client specific, and then underneath it, you have team members. Some of them are client and aligned specific to one team. Many, if not most, in this day and age, juggle across the whole. I mean, that's the whole point of saying to someone, do you want to be agency side or do you want to be client side? If you're client side, you're going to be focused on one thing. If you're agency side, that's the job. Juggling all those balls, working with 4 or 5 different art directors on 4 or 5 different brands. That's exactly what is called agency life.
And agreed. I found that to be my own experience, but you got to take a point of view and try to get to the heart of these articles. So sounds like
and also, Bob, aren't we in an era now where, by percentage, a larger and larger share of all creative output is manifestly visual? I think about it from a social media perspective, since that's a lot of the work that we do. And just in the last 3 years, we've gone from social media being primarily a written medium, right? Who can write a clever tweet, to now it is almost entirely photos and videos. Now, that doesn't mean the copywriter is unimportant, but in terms of percentage of the actual output, there's less copy out there and more visual storytelling.
But in terms of the ads on that side, Jay, I mean, it does start and end with the copywriter. So even the creative director, art director will say, this is the vision, this is what it's going to look like. But the copywriter there is that script. It is the sort of shot pans out, we come across a mountain with mist and a blue car racing through it. So in terms of output of what we see in content, yes. In terms of what we're doing on the internal guts of the ad stuff, it is for sure beginning and ending with the copywriter.
And I think that's a perfect segue into our next topic, which we're going to cover just in a minute, talking about how advertising has become often a game of just doing visual identity at the expense of anything that's uniquely described about the product, that we're not differentiating products well enough. We'll get to that in just a minute. But first, I want to talk about Content Marketing World, because Content Marketing World is coming up in 2 weeks, and we have two people who will be speaking at that particular event. Both Jay and Mitch will be at Content Marketing World coming up here on September 3rd in Cleveland, Ohio. So, Mitch, you want to tell us a little bit about what you're going to be talking about at the event?
I'm just laughing because Baer will remember that I did an event and I jokingly said something like, Jay probably remembers better, where I said something like, Jay's going to say this all, or I'll say it better. And he emailed me what did you say on stage? And I was like, no, we were just talking. I was talking about utilitarianism marketing. He was talking about utility at the time. And here we both sit, I think, being two unique voices in a very, very big content field, I think focused on the same topic. Mine is Hello Voice. And I'm going to be talking all about what's happening in terms of smart audio, smart speakers, things like Alexa, Google, Siri, Cortana, Bixby, and beyond. While I am out of the agency business, I've been doing a lot of investing, and one of my investments is with CAA, the creative team, and I've been doing a lot of advising and work on one of the companies within that is focused solely on smart audio, and I've been doing that for a bit under a year now. And it's been a space that I'm certainly fascinated with, and I've spoken about it on the BeanCast before, and I've written and blogged about it myself. So I will be focused on that area, and I believe cough, Jay is hot on it as well.
Whatever Mitch is saying, I'm saying the same thing. That's pretty much my career
better.
path. Yeah, just slightly better and with more hair
Exactly.
is pretty much the thing. Yeah, similar topic. In fact, there's hundreds of sessions at Content Marketing World. It's a fantastic event. I've never missed it. I never would miss it. It's terrific. I recommend it to everybody. But out of the many speakers there, Mitch and I are the only two who are talking about voice and voice activated content. So we're excited about that, and certainly Emily is eminently qualified to do the same. So next year, Emily needs to be speaking about it as well.
Yeah, and the people at Content Marketing World will be listening to this, I'm sure. So definitely we got to get Emily at the event. But let me tell you a little bit more about Content Marketing World before we move on. It's the world's original and largest annual gathering of content marketing professionals, all coming to hear the latest thinking on every topic imaginable about content marketing. They've got Henry Rollins, who's going to be keynoting this. They've got Mindy Kaling. Even more important, they've got Tamsin Webster. Tamsin Webster will be keynoting this event. Plus, we have breakout sessions with Christopher Penn and Ann Handley and Kate O'Neill and Scott Stratton and Lee Oden and Scott Monty. It just goes on and on. Even Tamsin's husband, Tom, will be there doing an event. So nearly every major global brand attends this event in Cleveland, Ohio, each and every year, and they're expecting this year over 4,000 attendees. Now, as agency people, you're going to want to come and check this out because of the agency track of sessions. They've also got a branded content track. And most importantly, I know I've said this since we started this ad campaign, come drink free booze at the agency exclusive cocktail hour. Plus, don't forget, with hundreds of new business prospects roaming this convention hall, you've got lots of opportunities to connect with the brands that you want to represent as an agency. So this is something that you want to be at. Agencies have not discovered this yet. You need to get there. Now, this is your last chance because this is the last time I'm reading this ad, and it's going to come up in 2 weeks, and we don't have a show next week. So this has got to be the moment. There really isn't a good excuse for you not to send at least one member of your staff and maybe even send yourself to this. September 3rd through the 6th are the dates. Cleveland, Ohio is where it's happening. Don't wait. Register today at contentmarketingworld.com. Use the offer code BeanCast, and they'll knock $100 off. Now, when you use that offer code, make sure you capitalize it. I don't know why, but that's the way they've set it up. So make sure you capitalize BeanCast when you use that offer code at contentmarketingworld.com. Register today, and I hope I see you there. Well, Forbes ran an interesting opinion piece about branding last week that was wonderfully blunt. The piece challenged brands to remove all of the branding elements from their marketing materials and ads, and then honestly evaluate whether the copy that was left still sold the product. The idea was to prove that too many brands advertise their category without differentiating their product at all. Jay, what is at the heart of this problem, or is it a problem? I mean, I always take these articles with a grain of salt, but I'm taking it at face value for now. Is it a problem, and what is causing it?
Yeah, it's clearly a problem. I'm a guy who wrote a whole book about differentiation in the last year. And so to be purposefully or accidentally undifferentiated on your own website seems like a bit of a missed opportunity. I love this article, Bob, because I actually did the same project on a sort of ad hoc basis like 3 years ago. I took 20 or 25 different MarTech companies who were trying to sell software in content marketing, social media, et cetera, and did the same thing, kind of took their web pages and blinded them and their taglines and asked a bunch of marketers, like, who is this? And nobody had any idea, right? You couldn't put a piece of paper between any of them. And it is frustrating, but I think part of it is that a lot of these organizations just don't really have what we mentioned Tom Webster in the ad, what Tom Webster has famously called the theory of the firm. The reason why they are not differentiated in their own materials is that they're not actually sure how they're differentiated in their own corporate culture. And if you don't know who you really are and how truly you are different from everybody else, it's pretty hard to express that in a way that's cogent and consistent. Not to mention the fact, Bob, there's lots of research to suggest that most B2B CMOs, and I presume it's the same for B2C companies as well, believe that today they really compete on customer experience more so than any sort of price or meaningful product differentiation. And customer experience is very difficult to describe and write about and show in a way that really sticks also. So that's a bit of a challenge. But I would say in general, it harkens back to Robert Stevens, the co-founder of Geek Squad, in his quote, which is one of my all-time favorites in business, which is that advertising is a tax paid by the unremarkable. And I think that's what we see here, right? People who don't really know what they are and don't know how that's different from the rest of the category are either doomed to a sea of sameness or have to spend a whole bunch of money to make that not the case.
Now,
Go ahead, Joe. It's a really tough article for me. I mean, it's a tough one because I think obviously Jay is 100% right, and I agree with everything he said. And then you get in on it, and then you're in on the business, and you're looking at it. And I can remember really plainly looking at our website back in the agency and looking at the team and being like, I could take our logos off of this. I could throw all the agency websites that do what we do together and throw them all in the air, and just logos land randomly on different websites, and it would probably still be somewhat accurate. And I think it's really, really difficult. I think positioning it's an easy thing to say, and it's an easy thing to say, be the only one. I could say coffee and you would go Starbucks. I could say retail, you might say Amazon or Walmart. If I said e-com, you might say Amazon. But this idea of, being the only solution, it feels kind of silly to me in a world where it's really hard to be the only solution, which is sort of what they're saying. To be a unique solution, perhaps more plausible. But it's a very, very tall order in a day and age that has become very globalized, that people do need a lot of clarity. And with clarity comes similarity. And it's just a hard thing to deliver. And we could talk about some of our favorite brands, and I think we would be really challenged to see how differentiated they feel from their competitors when we verbalize it or talk about it.
We just finished talking a lot about voice marketing. You guys are both going to be talking about voice marketing. And I want to go to Emily on this one because this comes up again and again when we talk about voice strategy. How do you differentiate when it's just a voice? You can use branding taglines and you can talk about your product, but it's really dependent upon the voice and the tone of the language, the words that you use. All of that can differentiate a brand, right? I mean, all of that matters in this process of trying to establish who you are as a company.
Oh, definitely. And I was thinking actually back to my car rental days, and I'll talk about voice in a second, but I just wanted to say, I remember a bunch of research that we did at Budget, and this was when we were redoing the visual logo and the whole brand identity. Of course, there was no sonic element at that point. And there's We Try Harder, there's We'll Pick You Up, there's Green Means Go, and most consumers can't correctly identify which brand goes with which tagline. Not to mention all the times that consumers mix up logos. Like, we spend so much time and effort on this, but it's in this sea of it's bloody and red, right, Mitch? And with voice, that is such a different game, and most brands don't even have that strategy or sonic branding at all. But it's a huge opportunity there. So,
but I mean, bigger than just the voice itself. I mean, what you just described to me is the use of language to differentiate brands is not just about being in a voice category. It's also applicable to everything that we do. And I don't think that we spend enough time thinking about the word choices as being part of the branding experience, that the language, the tone, all of that can change the identity of a brand. I mean,
this harkens back to what we were talking about with the copywriting being so important. Even as Jay said, yes, things are highly visual right now. I don't think they will stay so visually driven. It's certainly not with these 4-inch panes of glass that we're experiencing the world through. It's extremely limited. But the language, the words, all of that matters. It's paramount when you're thinking about a voice assistant, but essentially for all forms of advertising, copywriting, and positioning. Do you have a USP? Most of these brands don't really. And like Mitch said, I don't know that there is only one solution to so many problems. There are multiple solutions, and what's different or better or special about yours, what's unique about it. And then as far as reaching younger consumers, having some kind of maybe philanthropic or social justice or social good element to it also would help. And I mean, you'll see most brands starting to do that, the ones that are modern at least. But if you don't have that, and then you're just competing, like it's a race to the bottom on price in car rental, in a commodity, like that's what we were always doing. It was so boring. Nothing stood out there.
Yeah, and not to dump on the author, but I hopped over to their site. This is Glass River Media to see their key message, and their big message was "Don't be ignored," which and then how do they define themselves? As strategic communication and media production agency. And so again, maybe it's a bit of the cobbler's kids here, or I don't know what, but I think they're demonstrated by both the article and then their output how very challenging it is to differentiate in a world where everybody has basically seen everything. And when they want a product or service, there are a myriad of ways to get it done at different levels and different expenses and different types of ways. And so I look at it and go, I think it's important. You need to have a strong mission. You need to have a strong vision. That you have to have great deliverables. But at the end of the day, after that, I remember sitting in an audit for an agency, and they had gone to speak to their clients about about the agency brand. And the person sat in the room, the lead sat in the room and said, I went to and it was their top client. And the client basically said that if you put me into an MRI and scanned me, nothing would come out when asked about your company, like vanilla, zero. And it's like, imagine they're very happy with the work. They're doing phenomenally well. But if put in an MRI and asked about the agency, what would come up? Their answer was nothing.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, it's just like, and I think your point's well taken. I mean, it is a difficult challenge, but I don't think that it's impossible. And I'm wondering, Jay, from the standpoint of what's really at the heart of the problem, is it laziness? Is it a matter of just being blinded by great creative ideas that are fun but shallow? I mean, what's really going on? Why can't people take the time and work through it? I mean, yes, it's a hard challenge, but it's a challenge worth doing. And we talk about creative leaders who are able to shepherd through ideas throughout their organization. So why is it that we can't seem to do this?
I think it's two things, Bob. Either the company isn't actually different, therefore, to make it different is a bit of a wolf in sheep's clothing.
True.
Or two, they just don't have the institutional courage to be different. Because I wrote about this a lot in my book, Talk Triggers. If you look at business over the last, say, 30 to 40 years, we have almost holistically and consistently embraced this concept of best practices, of category leadership, of essentially playing follow the leader, of saying who is successful in our category. Let's try to do things more or less the way they do things because they have paved the way. They have proven that this path is successful. That is an unassailable culture of business, at least certainly in North America. And to be differentiated, to have the guts to say, yeah, we're in the same category with these other guys, but we're going to do it really different, so different that you could take our logo off the website and know it's exactly us. That requires an organization from the CEO on down that is entirely willing to swim against the prevailing current for decades. And there's lots of examples of companies that do that very well. I documented many of them in the book. But it's easier to say on a podcast than it is to do, because to do it right means the entire company has to be bought in. And as Mitch well knows, the bigger the company gets, the harder it is to get everybody to buy in.
And the other thing is I so agree with Jay, and I often do. And I think that's why we've both really enjoyed each other's companies and think a lot of the same things and get excited about the same things, because I also can't sit here and say to you, so don't pursue it. I think that at the end of the day, if you're open for business, business is personal and business matters, and how you build your word of mouth or your talk triggers and how you build your community out and how you treat your customers and how you provide good products and good service underneath it with a brand that people can latch onto and really care about and that's differentiated is the dream. I mean, it is the dream, and it's a worthy pursuit. You do it here with the BeanCast. I do it on mine blog. Jay does it with Convince and Convert. Emily does it with Beetle. Like we're all thinking about how to make ourselves be those sort of category killers where you could remove the So I don't want to have anybody to think we shouldn't pursue it. I just really believe it's so easy to sit back and constantly write these articles when in reality, if you look at the people who've created the articles or the clients they work with, it's pretty ho-hum because it's very hard to be iconic and consistently iconic.
Yeah, and I think you're both right with that. I mean, it is easier to say than to do, but it's a journey worth pursuing if a brand is the willingness to do so. Well, I want to continue this conversation about creative here with another topic that came up in the news this week. A lot of people talking about brand mascots for some reason. I love to trot out the Pillsbury Doughboy on my first day of class each semester. Basically, I teach at NYU. I teach in the night course. I teach a lot of foreign nationals about marketing, and I show the Pillsbury Doughboy to a bunch of Chinese nationals, and I ask them, "Does this make you hungry?" And they laugh at me because they have no reference to this. I mean, it's just an example that I give them every single semester to show them that the brand this is a 95, 100-year-old brand that is completely meaningless to you because your mom never made crescent rolls on Thanksgiving. And I think that's the heart of branding. And, basically mascots are really just a mnemonic for some kind of experience. And that experience is powerful if you had the experience, but it's meaningless if you didn't. And I think that brand mascots offer a great way to create some kind of emotional connection with a consumer, as long as it's supported well by the brand itself, by the other marketing going on around it. Now, a recent study confirms that brand mascots work very, very well. And Mitch, what makes for a good mascot in your eyes? What would you say, when would you say to a client, you need a mascot to generate the kind of love and attention and affection that a lot of these other brands get from as a result of their mascots?
So I was with my family recently in New York City, and we took them over to Bushwick Collective over in Brooklyn, which is an amazing amalgamation of street art and culture. And I highly recommend anyone who visits New York City to go and spend a morning or an afternoon at the Bushwick Collective. Tons of street art, really diverse, lots of really different cool things. And, I stopped dead in my tracks when I saw the Count Jocula mural. And, even watching you react to it, Bob, is an indication of what that means. And what I thought of was, why is that? And we can think of the Colonel from Kentucky Fried Chicken. We can think of Big Boy. We can think of the dog at Target. We can think of all the cereals, Lucky Charms, Trix, Geico. I believe there's a couple things happening. One, it is a truly unique way to be original. I think they are usually very highly visual, and I think that they're not only highly visual, but they always incorporate the sound and voice. That's why I tried to do my very bad version of the Pillsbury Doughboy while you were speaking. But it has all of those sort of iconic elements that we would all agree is what makes something unique and stand out. The other thing you typically see is that even though the product may not be directly targeted towards kids, I mean, Geico would be a great example of that, there's still this sort of child in all of us. And so whether it be stuff that is more retro or brings us back to our childhood, like, Silly Rabbits, Tricks Are for Kids, or Lucky Charms, or whatever it might be, that triggers something in adults. I think those things were in general created to be sort of just to sit alongside the superheroes and cartoons of the day, which created its own sort of cultural thing. And so I just think you have to think about, how do you want this to be perceived in the market? You think about the Green Giant too. It wasn't just targeted to moms, which it was, but it was the fact that the kids would see it and probably want to grab it while they're at the supermarket. I find myself recently very fascinated with the company Funko and their pop vinyls. And they've got a whole line of these sort of ad icons that they create for. And when you look at them, aligned with all the other ones that they do, you realize that there is something there. There's something that sort of takes you back as an adult. And at the same time, if you're young, it sort of just attracts you to it in the same way a story does.
There's an interesting thing, going back to what my original point was when I started this topic. I mean, this idea that a brand mascot is meaningful only if you have an experience with it. Is that always true, Emily? I mean, it's just like there are mascots that are so cute that they draw you in and they get you to find out, what are you a mascot for? And there's also that element to them. But is the mascot's true strength just the experience around using the product or seeing their advertisements or somehow otherwise connecting with the brand? Or is it also a lead generator? Is it also an acquisition tool? And is it as effective in both realms?
What do you mean as a lead generator?
Like, I mean, it's if you put the Pillsbury Doughboy in an ad and you've never had any experience with Pillsbury, that character attracts you to the brand and makes you want to explore it. Does it do that? Is that as effective for a brand in most cases, or is this more about the experience, like I think, which is basically, you've had an experience with the brand and then you get that good feeling, that goodwill for the brand as a result of that when you see that icon. It's more of a mnemonic of a past experience.
Right. I think it is that much more than lead gen, especially if you're dealing with ESL students or someone who's never been exposed to this before. No, it's not going to generate a lot of leads. It's unfamiliar, and especially as an adult, it's like learning a new sport. But if you get them while they're young, like do a Happy Meal, Ronald McDonald. But thinking about Tony the Tiger, Leo Burnett, the Critter Agency, they did this multiple times. You've got Pillsbury Doughboy, there's the Marlboro Man, there's Charlie the Tuna. These are iconic. And if you think of the economy as 2/3 consumer spending, and one of the components of that consumerism is an informed consumer. So advertising informs them. It gives them that information in a mnemonic, like you said, Bob, in a way that's accessible and very easy to remember.
Now, Jay, there's one aspect about this that's always troubling. We find out in studies like this that mascots work really well for brands, that they are valuable, that they increase value. But why is it that so many brands do not have a mascot, and why not? I mean, if brand mascots are so powerful, why is it just reserved for, quite frankly, a minority of brands out there?
Yeah, I think the article, Bob, said something like 4% of major U.S. brands had a mascot. I think that's the number. It's single digits for sure. I think there's two reasons to it. First, if you don't have a mascot today and you're going to launch a new mascot program, that without question carries with it some significant risk. Because when you deconstruct the creative brief on all the mascots we just talked about, like, okay, it's a dough boy, like I mean, it's like everything about it. Like, wait, it's like
you know what? It's just like
she wears an apron. Like when you sort of deconstruct all the successful mascots, it's a tiger that.
Oh, the doughboy! I could talk forever on the doughboy.
Tony, and there's alliteration. Like it's very bizarre, and so the degree of risk, you got to really swing for the fences at the beginning, and that's a little scary. And then once there already is a mascot, I feel like every time somebody changes agencies, they don't want to do more creative that features the mascot because no one's going to put that in their book. No one's going to say, hey, look what a great copywriter I am. I did the 114th consecutive Tony the Tiger ad. That's not going to win any awards. So it's scary to create a mascot, and then there's no creative incentive to perpetuate it once you get the assignment.
And, you bring up the Pillsbury Doughboy. I love waxing poetic about the Pillsbury Doughboy just because it's an icon that was created to solve a specific creative problem that was only present 100 years ago when people weren't ready to go and ditch making stuff from scratch and go to frozen food aisle and get this frozen pre-prepared baked goods item. And it was almost like you're being a bad parent as a result of this. And what they did is they created the Doughboy out of, basically referencing something that everybody made whenever they would be baking. They took the leftover dough, they turned it into a little boy, and they baked it, and then the kids played with it. And it was almost like a statement to the moms out there, you can go and you can buy our product and you won't be a bad mother for serving it. And I think that is the genesis of that mascot, but we don't know that. We have no reference to that. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't solve any problems anymore, but it did then. And I think for me, that's always been the key aspect of when you go to a mascot is do you have a specific problem that needs to be solved, and does the mascot solve that problem?
Fun, but it's fun. It is original. It's quirky. It's different. And I think if you go back and look at the more iconic ones, it had to be done that way. It was a day and age where brands and products lived and died by how loud they could scream and how much attention they could capture. I'm not saying that's not the situation now, but it really was a place of three networks. Those who pay get to play. And you had these brands that didn't want to waste their moments, whether it was during the soap operas or during the kids shows. And so they created these absurd things, as Jay so rightly pointed out, but they're so absurd and so memorable that here we are, and they are icons not just of products but of our culture. And if you think about, maybe the answer to all the questions and articles that we talked about before was actually a mascot. I'm saying that facetiously.
Yeah, if your website's not differentiated, what you need is a mascot on that site. That's going to solve the problem right now.
But again, Jay, you and I have seen instances where people don a character, a color, something quirky for their what is often considered serious and shouldn't be, and that's what differentiates them. So I'm clearly not saying everyone needs a colonel from the KFC, but
I only wear plaid suits, and that's not an accident.
Well, yeah, Jay's his own caricature. Yeah. But I think it's an important thing to think about, that when we think about icons in advertising and we listed them out, I think we'd run short pretty quick. But when you started talking about mascots and characters, we'd probably go very long, and it would illuminate the fact that there's more iconic stuff than we thought.
Well, all I know is this whole show and everything about it has a branded mascot. It's got the little beans. I've been using them forever, and it solved a very specific creative problem for me, which was how to get remembered once you handed a business card to somebody. So I handed a business card with beans, and when the email came to follow up, it had the beans at the bottom, and it was solving a specific problem because everybody remembered it. But that's a whole nother story. People still mistake it for pickles, so what can I say? Finally, in the entertainment...
It's an art direction problem, Bob, not a copywriting problem.
Not a copywriting problem, definitely. Well, finally, in the entertainment industry, there's a thing called Coogan's Law that protects child actors from predatory guardians and ensures that at least a 20% portion of a child's earnings will be set aside in trust until they turn 18. The trouble is, as with most things created in the analog era, the law doesn't cover digital media, leaving child influencers vulnerable and the brands that work with them potentially exposed to that vulnerability. So, Emily, how should brands approach this very touchy subject? Is this something that keeps brands from working with child influencers, or at least working with a great deal of caution? Or is this something that they can proactively do something about in order to protect the child influencers that they work with?
Well, in a perfect world, they would be really careful with it. I don't know if brands like Mattel and Walmart and Disney and Staples, who are using, we'll call them kidfluencers, it's a silly term, but just to differentiate between an older adult social media influencer and a kid. We've got TV ratings that are continuing to fall. Kids spend more time online. Advertisers want to spend their money where they can reach the audience. But if you're using actual children as influencers, you are then targeting children who are watching those influencers, which is problematic because you look at television that's overseen by the FCC, and there are rules that separate ads from content, and they limit product placement, and the internet doesn't have that. So the content is the ad. I think it's a really scary place actually for brands to tread. And the whole thing is kind of disturbing. When I was doing some research on this, like there's this little girl named Samia Ali. Her channel is Samia's Life, Instagram, YouTube. She's 4 years old. And her parents said, sometimes we'll pop in to make sure that we articulate the deliverables for whatever brand is sponsoring the content, because she's too young to articulate it. She's probably too young to understand being exploited. I guess for brands, what you should do is, minimize how problematic it is. Is this a kid that wants to be doing it? Does it look like they're having fun? Are there behind the scenes shots showing them laughing and engaging willingly? Or is this something where their parents are driving it and it's just rife for exploitation? I would tread very carefully here.
I think all of your points, all of your suggestions make a lot of sense. And I think that brands do need to take an active role in making sure that the people that they're working with are not being treated unfairly or improperly in any way, no matter what age they are. And I think
how would you know?
But that's the exact problem I'm having. It's just like, how would you know in the end? And do we need to take a more proactive stance in terms of going after legislation, trying to do things to help these kids, specifically asking very hard questions of the families before we work with them? Shouldn't we be more aggressive?
Couldn't brands just set up a percentage of the compensation and put it into trust for the kids and be like, look, we're gonna give you 80% of this and run it through your agent or your parents or whatever your legal entity is, and then we as a brand are going to set up a portion of this overall compensation and put it in trust for the child. So when the child turns 18, she or he has access to the trust. That's the way trusts work in the real world. I don't know why a brand couldn't do that if they were concerned about making sure that nothing untoward happens to the financial remuneration.
I think that's a great idea.
This is a tough. I mean, it's a tough one. One is it's a whole other sort of legal conversation about brands and their desires to sort of do that and have oversight on it and how you manage it. It's a bit of a nightmare. I don't disagree.
I think it's a business opportunity. I think there's a business opportunity there. But if you're like, hey, we're gonna be the company that runs trusts for child influencers and actually is that middleman and kind of does the escrow, I think there's an actual startup idea there.
It's a step before this, guys. That's the problem. It's a step before this is the problem, which is the fact that these kids don't necessarily understand the money and what's happening. In fact, most of them don't. This is really tragic. I don't think it's going to end well. And if you dig into the topic, I mean, this is a tough thing to say because you still need legal entities to open accounts, which are typically your parents, accountants, agents. We have to be in a place where we're making very, very big assumptions that everybody's doing the right thing for the right thing. And it's all easy to say until a guy like Ryan's from Ryan Toys comes around at, what is he, 7 years old? He's pulling in $22 million a year. So it's a tough thing when a 7-year-old has no concept of what commerce is, how business works, what investments means, what a trust means, what an account. I mean, they just have no concept of it. We're sort of assuming that there's these conversations. This is a very, very dangerous thing, and it's very dangerous for one particular reason. The media structure is currently set up to engage with this. That's this law that they're talking about, this Coogan's law. Social media has been absolved of this problem. In fact, when they tried to push it through, what happened is that they said, okay, fine, we're going to push it through, but it doesn't count if the person is unpaid or if the content is shorter than an hour. How long is a YouTube video typically? So right away, it sort of didn't work. I think what's happening is it's an awakening moment. And this article in the Hollywood Reporter, and there have been others, should be an awakening to all of us that something needs to happen. And there's no reason for any videos that have a true level of monetization that shouldn't fall under these laws and regulations. And the real problem is when you look at this and sort of dig in is that it is so unenforceable. That's the real thing. It's just an unenforceable law because of the nature of how these videos are shot. You're not renting studios. You're not on a specific network. It was really different with childhood actors. Now you have people shooting a video in a Walmart. Should someone be calling the cops on them to make sure the kid's being fairly compensated? This is a tough one.
It is. And, to that point, the law itself, which, by the way, Coogan's law is in California, and there are versions of it in 3 other states, New York, New Mexico, Louisiana. This is not national. And the law itself is a statutory obligation. The state is trusting the parents will comply. And what's the recourse? If you're a child actor and your parents are screwing over, you can sue them when you're 18. That's it. No one's watching.
And that's the thing too. Like this is the problem is, when is it a hobby? When is it work? When it is monetization versus when it's just fun? When is this just, kids and families taking part in using technology to tell better stories versus it's a multi-million-dollar business? These are really delicate sort of stories that aren't fine. You can't just go, well, here's a show. It's on CBS at 8 p.m. and there's 4 kids in it. Okay, that's easy to eyeball. This is really hard. You're going to see kids playing in a park talking about a video. We're going to pull them over by the cops and see if they've got, licenses to do so. This is like a huge problem. And again, when I read it, I felt embarrassed and somewhat naive. You've got these people who are making millions and millions of dollars, and we have no idea. No one has any oversight as to ethics, where this money lands. This is really scary.
Well, like Farrah Bostic always says, advertising is one of the few professions that has absolutely no ethics education as part of it. I mean, if you're a lawyer, you have to go back for your ethics test every few years. If you're a doctor, you have to do so. Advertising has no ethics behind it, and it really needs to have some kind of statute or some kind of process for establishing ethics across so many issues, and this is being one of them that's coming up more and more. Well, with that, it's time for the good, the bad, and the ugly. But before we get to that segment of the show, I do want to take this quick opportunity to thank my guests again and allow them to each do a shameless plug, starting with Jay Baer. You can find him at convinceandconvert.com. He's got several books. He speaks everywhere. Jay, what would you like to promote?
my most recent book, Talk Triggers, is when your anniversary comes up October 2nd. My co-author Daniel Lemon and I are launching the very first Talk Triggers Awards. We'll be having a live webinar and a presentation on October 2nd. We've identified 18 companies across 6 different categories of business that are doing amazing things with word of mouth and about differentiation, one of the topics on today's show. So look for that. Go to talktriggers.com for more details. We're really excited. We've got trophies that are that look like alpacas and a number of other things. It's going to be a blast.
Congratulations. That sounds exciting. Now, next up, we have Emily Binder. You can find her at BeetleMoment.com. That's the home of her consultancy where she talks a lot about the voice industry, voice marketing. Tell us what's going on in your world, Emily. What would you like to promote?
Sales through voice-enabled commerce are expected to reach $40 billion by 2022. Most brands don't have a strategy for voice. I can help you prepare for that. Go to BeetleMoment.com for more information. On the voice note, I want to mention a friend of mine, Audrey Arbini, whose company Audio Brain New York is the world's leading sonic branding firm for over 25 years. I've been doing some really neat stuff with her, and this is just something that I wanted to share with anyone in the audience who's interested in getting your sonic branding done by an expert. They've done IBM, Google, Xbox 360, Whirlpool, Toshiba, 9 Olympics broadcasts. Like Audrey's team is just the best. And most brands have a visual identity, like we've been talking about all episode, but haven't considered their sound. So, with voice assistants on the rise like Alexa, it's meteoric growth. Sonic branding is a must. You can find out more about what Audrey does at audiobrain.com.
That's really fascinating. I definitely have to check that out. Last but not least, Mitch Joel. You can find him at 6pixels.com. That's where you can find his podcast and his blog and his other podcasts and all kinds of things that he's doing. Tell us what's going on in your world. What would you like to promote, Mitch?
Well, it was part of the commercial. It was part of what we were talking about. I think we should talk more about Content Marketing World. It's going to be a great event. It's actually happening the same week as Inbound from HubSpot in Boston, which I will be at both. So that's what I'll talk about. Check me out at 6pixels.com. But come and say hi. Come and hang out with Jay and myself. And who knows, maybe Emily will pop in. Bob, you're always welcome.
I wish I could, but I can't. Unfortunately, I've got to be in the same city the next week to talk at Smucker's. So I'm not going to be able to be at the Content Marketing World.
Tell
and see you guys
Smuckers
all.
that what they need is a mascot.
Okay, I'll make sure to bring that up.
Jay Baer is right.
As for me, for more information about me or the show, visit thebeancast.com. There you can find a complete show archive. You can find out how to consult with me, and you can even find out how to advertise on the program. So check it out at thebeancast.com. And now it's time for the good, the bad, and the ugly, a rundown of the best and worst of advertising, marketing, and public relations from the last week. And first up, Boston-based Legal Seafoods took advantage of the obvious branding opportunity present in the recent implementation of legal recreational marijuana use in Massachusetts. So, Mitch, when you go to Massachusetts, you can get baked when it'll be completely legal. But I thought what was interesting most about this... Are you going to do that?
One is you're saying it to the person who does none of that and who lives in a country where it's completely legal coast to coast.
Yeah, I remember that as I was saying that little joke, so it didn't really work as well as I wanted to. But whatever, we'll talk about this anyway. So I thought it was really cool what they did here because it's silly. The ads are silly. They use a lot of puns and bad jokes in the process to establish that legal seafood is part of legal marijuana, a legal state, a state where marijuana is legal to be used. I thought this was really clever, Mitch. I mean, it's just like this was really interesting, and it was completely on brand for somebody who has any connection to marijuana at all, except the legal part. I thought that was really clever and very interesting and pretty good.
I think if you've got the munchies, Legal Seafood may be the last place you go.
Good point. But they do have the legal thing, so you got to give them credit for that. Well, on the
my favorite one in the campaign, Bob, was you know what else likes to get baked at 420? Salmon. That was one of their print ads, which is pretty good.
It's like a bad Will Ferrell joke.
I know the jokes were bad, but I still thought it was clever that they latched onto the legal part. I don't know. It was good for me. Anyway, the bad of the week. A Wall Street Journal investigation found over 4,000 products listed on Amazon that are considered dangerous to consumers. Emily, this is not just 4,000 products. This is the 4,000 that they found. They have a real problem building out this third-party platform where 60% of the products are not directly sold from Amazon anymore. And they're having almost zero control over what is actually being offered to consumers.
It's a total mess. And the problem is Amazon maybe didn't start out to do this, but that's where they are now. And if they have copy all over their site saying we stand behind this and this is the Amazon experience, you have to actually police it. I think we've all tried to save a buck here or there by buying like the shady Chinese listing with the blurry graphics and 0 reviews. And every time you regret it because it's a problem, but hopefully it's not like the 116 products that were falsely listed as FDA approved, including 98 eyelash growth serums that don't have a drug approval process to be marketed. Like you could actually get injured or killed if it's a motorcycle helmet. So it's a great strategy, though, for Amazon Basics because that's the vetted, trusted search result everybody will start to go to.
Oh,
I just think like we have to shut down wish.com if this is true.
Oh, my God. Wish.com. What a joke. I actually got suckered into looking at that app, just looking at it. And it took me all the 3 seconds to realize, oh, my God, now they have my name and address. I need to get out of this as quick as I possibly can. Well, last but not least, the ugly of the week. Overstock CEO Patrick Byrne finally forced out after publicly peddling the president's conspiracy theories, railing against the FBI, and having a fling with the now convicted Russian spy, Maria Butina or something like that. Anyway, Jay, this is not a good look for a company that he founded. The company finally said, we've had enough. We need your resignation. And he left. Good for them, but a lot of PR backlash as a result of this.
When I heard about this, Bob, the first thing that came to mind was somebody just won a ton of money in things that CEOs do bingo, right? Because that there's some sort of like weird shadowy collective of financiers, et cetera, who have this game about who's going to do the craziest stuff. And okay, look, forced out of your company, I can believe that, right? You're a Trump lover, sure. You're anti the federal government, I can buy that.
You believe in the deep state.
Right, yeah. Romanced by a Russian spy, I didn't have that one. That's next level. That is totally next level. Somebody won bingo and they deserved it.
Oh, absolutely. Well, have a suggestion for this list or just want to discuss it, comment online by using the hashtag GBU. That's #GBU. And that does it for this week's show. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, visit our website at thebeancast.com and click on the subscribe link. If you're an Apple Podcast listener, we've also provided a direct link to our listing there, or just search for the BeanCast in the podcast directory on the Apple Podcasts app. And whichever podcast directory you use, when you subscribe, please leave us a review. Got a comment? Have a question? We'd love to hear from you. Just send your emails to beancast@gmail.com. Opening theme was performed by Joe Seibel. Closing theme by C. Jax. Thanks for listening. I'm Bob Norp. We'll be back again in 2 weeks. Hope you'll join us then.
You know what I mean? It's like if it's, you know what I mean? I don't know, man. It's just like, okay, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like totally like that. It's like, I don't know, like if it's, it's like, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just like kind of, it just seems like it's just like almost exactly. It's like exactly. Yeah.
beans.